here today and to not have any goldfish or Play-Doh with me. I'm going to invite us to take a closer look and focus in on our gospel text from today. Luke 5, 1 through 11 tells the story of Jesus calling his first disciples. And perhaps you're like me, perhaps you grew up in the church and you have become very conditioned to this story. It was always a favorite in Sunday school. But for the next few minutes, I hope we can approach this story in the Gospel of Luke with fresh eyes. Luke is painting a picture that we miss if we remain in this conditioned state of understanding the story. So according to Luke, the people of the region have become somewhat acquainted with Jesus at this point in his ministry. Although it's early on, between the beginning of the book of Luke and where we find this story, we see that Jesus has been baptized, tested in the wilderness, rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. He drives out an impure spirit. He heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law, heals various other sicknesses, and sends demons out of people. Jesus meets Simon Peter, at the water's edge of the Lake of Gennesaret, which is another name for the Sea of Galilee. And after fishing all night, Simon has not caught anything. But Jesus tells him, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for catch." Simon tells them that they've worked all night and they didn't catch anything. But he adds, "But because you say so, I will let down my nets." Upon doing so, they catch so many fish that their nets begin to break. Another boat comes out and the boats fill and they begin to sink. Simon Peter then quickly says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Simon Peter's crew was astonished, and Jesus said, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Nearly every sermon, lesson, or teaching I can remember about this text seems to skip everything and go right to that last line of Jesus. "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Often interpreted for me as a message that because I know Jesus, I need to be evangelizing in the world and fishing for people to come to know Jesus as well. This is a rich story, often reduced to a surface-level transactional form of evangelism. But I think there's more going on here. This is where we find Jesus building his community, his group of disciples and followers. Jesus is beginning the work of bringing people on mission with him. The mission that started long before him is coming to a tangible reality in Jesus, and it's a mission that will continue long after he's gone. This is what the text is really about. It's about Jesus extending an invitation to Simon Peter to join him on the mission of God. It's about Jesus extending an invitation for us to join him on the mission of God. A mission that is rich in redemption and restoration. Luke's account reveals that the good news of Jesus has been spreading through the region for some time before Jesus invites Peter, James, and John to join him. The good news, or the mission of God, is on display among the people through miraculous healings, teachings, the driving out of demons. The restoration and redemption of God is at work in both earthly and spiritual realms. The good news of great joy, displayed in a manger in Bethlehem, has grown up. I've spent the last few weeks really trying to inhabit Epiphany. So if you're unfamiliar with Epiphany, it's this season right now that we're in, according to the Christian calendar, that falls after Christmas and leads up to Ash Wednesday, or the season of Lent. And what I'm learning about Epiphany is that it's a season where we recall the life of Christ, or the mission of God on display in the person of Jesus. You know, it wasn't that long ago that we celebrated Christmas. We celebrated God becoming flesh, divine humbling to human form. And at Christmas, there's all this hope that comes as we wait for Jesus. As we sit in awe of the baby in the manger, we are given a sliver of peace that heaven has come down to earth. We are being made new, restoration is happening, redemption is among us. Yet by January 1st, most of us Christian Americans have packed Christmas away into tiny, neat, and organized boxes, or if you're like me, large, overflowing, not organized boxes. But nonetheless, we've put Christmas in the attic. Some of us really glad that Christmas is over, saying things like, we made it. We don't have to see those relatives for a whole nother year. And as Christmas becomes out of sight, out of mind, it seems as though the good news we were just celebrating does too. In December, we celebrate the baby, but we never make it to the part where we celebrate the mission or the reality of God becoming flesh. We acknowledge the baby and we say it's good news, but we don't let that good news carry us too far beyond the month of December.
That's right.
Growing up, I can remember people in my church referring to a certain type of Christian as a CEO Christian, or a Christmas and Easter only Christian. And while this is funny and I'm sure true for some people, I was struck this week by its relevance. As I look around, I think the majority of Christians I see are CEO Christians, even if they show up to church 3 times a week, every week. It's almost as if these bookend moments of Jesus' life really matter, and they do, but we focus so much on the bookends that we forget that what happened in between really matters too. I'm increasingly convinced that far too many Christians really only care about Jesus on Christmas and Easter. I was driving through rural Middle Tennessee this week, and I came across a sign in someone's front yard that I'm sure they just forgot to take down at this point, but it said, "Christmas is all about Jesus." And while I agree with this sentiment, I said as I was driving out loud, well, isn't it all about Jesus? Isn't today just as much about Jesus as Christmas is? Isn't the 4th of July just as much about Jesus as Christmas? Isn't every Tuesday just as much about Jesus as Christmas? Shouldn't things like wedding days and holidays and election days and seemingly insignificant days be just as much about Jesus as Christmas? Shouldn't all our days drip with the essence of and reverence for Jesus? But so often it appears that the American Christian narrative says otherwise. The reality is that nothing is more about Jesus than Christmas and Easter, hence CEO Christians. And don't get me wrong, Jesus really matters on Christmas and Easter, but Jesus gets lost or buried away somewhere between these 2 big Christian celebrations. And perhaps more importantly, the mission of Jesus, the mission that Jesus began, the mission that we are all called to participate on, gets lost somewhere along the way. We find ourselves hanging in the balance between Christmas and Easter, sitting in the season of Epiphany, and I am convinced that Jesus is gently whispering into our ears, saying, please, let me matter as much today as I do on Christmas and Easter. The text here in Luke is a reminder of the mission of God. It is a text to pull us back into the season of Epiphany. And it tells us that as we become more aware of the full experience of Christmas and Easter, that happens when the life of Jesus matters to us. When the mission of Jesus really matters to us, Christmas and Easter carry a much more significant reality. We don't necessarily have the time here to dive into the mission of God at length, to unpack and explore our role and responsibility as Christ followers, but I do think this text sheds a little light on the magnitude of what Jesus is calling us to do. At the end of the text, Jesus extends the ultimate invitation and calling by saying, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. The original verb here for fish in the Greek, or some translations might say catch, the original translation is literally to capture alive or to spare life. Simon Peter is called onto a mission concerned with bringing life to people. Jesus is concerned with bringing people life. When we look at the things Jesus has already been doing up to this point in his ministry, we see that this life-giving mission is far bigger than we ever could have imagined. Friends, we are called onto the mission of sparing life. We are called onto the mission of making Jesus matter deeply in every arena of our life. And as we do this, we align ourselves with the calling of love and life for people. Epiphany, this no man's land between Christmas and Easter, is really a remarkable time in the Christian calendar. We have the chance right now to sit in the good news of the life of Christ, the teachings of Jesus, and the healing and restoration that Christ brings. We have the opportunity to reflect on the mission that we are joining Jesus on and what the commitment really entails. The reality is that we can do this any time of the year, but between Christmas and Easter, it just feels like a sweet spot. Christmas calls us to await the hope. Epiphany calls us to lean into the mission. Mm-hmm. And Easter tells us that the hope and the mission will win out in the end.
That's right.
May we leave here with a passion to make Jesus matter today and to join Jesus, Simon Peter, James, and John in the work of sparing life everywhere we go.
Amen.